on, but the first part of my master's, I just created these really large Word documents and was putting in, what does this, what do we know about, the effective ways to communicate risk? And then I would break that down into a bunch of sub-questions. And through the process, I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure how many people really enjoy literature reviews, but it does, when you frame it as this kind of question asking and question answering, it can be like a really rewarding process. So I'm going to share some of the tips that I had throughout that time, just to get a bit of a read. Can I get like a sense of the room for people who are currently in formal education and have maybe done literature reviews for like a master's thesis or a PhD thesis so far? Cool. Okay, so a couple of you, and if you guys have any comments or additions, definitely feel free to jump in and add that through the chat function. And those of you who maybe like are entirely new to literature reviews, can I get like a little thumbs up or a little hand raise from those? That's a good question. We've just had, is this being recorded? Yes, this will be recorded. Is it currently recorded?
Yep, it's being recorded.
Oh yeah, sweet. Cool, we're all good to go. So in this session, what is a literature review? What are the different databases and search tools that you can use? When you're writing a review, I'll share my process of doing that, and reference management as well. So I'm going to share a tool that I use called Zotero, which I think is really useful alongside these kind of literature synthesis documents that I'll be talking about. So a literature review is really when you're, there's two things that you could refer to here. One is in a paper or when you're presenting your research. This is where you're giving it kind of is a summary of all of the information that is leading up to why your research is important. So you take information about what is currently known, previous studies that have looked at similar things, or previous studies that have identified some sort of gap. You want to prove that you're not doing research that's already been done, or in case you're doing a machine learning study where you are trying to replicate, you might talk about the replication crisis and therefore, describe the study that you are trying to replicate, what you expect to see. By the end of the literature review, people should have a solid expectation of, they should, if they didn't know the topics that you were talking about, they should start to have some ideas about what your research is going to find, because you've given them all of the information that's relevant for them to say, if you're testing it, if you're running an experiment in this way, or if you're running a test in this way, I know some of the things that might feed into my expectations of how that test is going to turn out. So you're giving all of the information and context that somebody needs in order to really understand your research. There's another part of this, which is a little bit more of like an academic wonky thing, where you're showing that you understand the scholarly conversation. And often when you submit your academic papers, a reviewer might just say, oh, but you didn't include the information or the scholarly information around this particular part of it. Generally, what you're trying to do in a literature review in these kind of more academic areas is you're trying to say, no, look, I understand that this is here, and I understand exactly how it's relevant to my research. So the kind of different types that people might be doing, you might do just a broad summary in social sciences. You might say, here is a nice kind of easily readable, generally, summary of what has gone on in this area before. A systematic review is really systematized by the name, you might have guessed. And so there's a set kind of list of processes that people will follow for this. They'll report exactly what search terms they're using. They will, first check the, I haven't done a systematic review myself, but like you might first check the names of the papers and the abstracts, and you check if they're in scope. So you kind of say, we found 2,000 papers that were relevant. We've reduced that down to 734 through an abstract reading and selection process. And then through a systematic review, you kind of order all of the papers into broad areas. And what you're trying to do there is say, we're comprehensively checking all of the information that is available on this topic. And then there's some other ones that, a meta-analysis, for example, Cochrane reviews will take examples from, will take studies, and you'll actually use statistics on the results reported, so that you can say, well, we've had 12 different studies that were studying the same thing. They all had slightly different populations, and over the 12 studies, we actually find that there's no statistically significant effect, even though 3 of those studies themselves found statistically significant effects. So a meta-analysis is trying to say, okay, can we overcome some of the follies of science, where, for example, through p-hacking or through p-value hacking is where you just kind of test 100 things and you find, oh, look, 5 things were statistically significant because you've set your threshold at 5% chance of being found by chance. So you're trying to overcome some of these biases in the scientific process, and a scoping review might just be used to map the breadth of the topic, where you're kind of telling people, all right, these are some of the key parts, but you're not necessarily integrating them together. And so this might just be as an exploratory area. And this was broadly one of the things that I was doing for my master's thesis, just informally at the start, where I was saying, okay, I really need to figure out, what is going on? What are all the different concepts that might be related? So if I just summarize out these different fields, and what people have tried in these different fields, then I start to see an area of the field in more detail. Okay, so when you're finding content, if you're at a university, you have generally access to your university library system, which will have access to a lot more papers through the open access databases. Through agreements that they have with all of the journals. There's also open access sources, or some journals will publish a certain number of papers under open access, meaning that anyone can read them and download them. So some of the common ones that you might have through your university, so for people who aren't at universities, this is just for your information so that you if you come across them, you're aware of them. So ProQuest and Scopus, Web of Science, and JSTOR are all generally kind of large journals or large collections of databases of I want to say written, but there's also sometimes videos and audio in there. So, full kind of texts of some form that can provide you really strong access. And so a review, ideally would start out with one of these, looking for all of your keywords, but that is not always possible, especially if you're outside of the institutions that have the agreements to get access to the journals. So instead, some ways that you might be able to find high quality science papers would be through JSTOR open content. If you register, you can get some articles per month for free. There's also, I think it's, on the, there's many more on the next page that give a little bit more information, but there's some additional ones that you might be able to get access to, or that have a certain number of free access. So because this is in the recording, I'll move on, and hopefully you've had some time to write those down if you're interested. Generally, Google Scholar, I find Google Scholar, like in machine learning, is actually quite useful because it'll link out to the archive. So sometimes if you search through archive, it's very difficult to actually find the papers that have the content that you're interested in. But if you're trying to follow one researcher, for example, who has done many things that you is kind of in the research topic that you're interested in, you can go onto Google Scholar and it will generally link to the archive website, or you can follow their citations through the archive website. And it's just a little bit of a kind of friendlier interface sometimes to find a summary of what somebody has been working on over time. So preprint servers. So can I get a show of thumbs up if you have heard of the term preprint before and you've used this? You're kind of aware of maybe the caveats of preprints. Cool. Okay. Yeah, that's exciting to say. Oh my gosh, so many. I get a little explosion of thumbs up. So yeah, so preprint means that it has not gone through an official journal. Generally, this will mean that it could be a lower quality. I've certainly come across some papers on preprint servers where I think, you know, my gosh, this person has just scribbled down their thoughts on a piece of paper, or typed down their thoughts on a PDF. And, you know, I'm not sure if I'm going to agree with the, you know, believe that they have applied scientific scrutiny in the case of writing this paper. What that might look like is you might have arguments that are made that are, you know, not necessarily up to the scientific rigor. So people might be making logical fallacies. You might also have studies that don't report all of the information, the statistical information that would be normal to report. So for example, if you're running a statistical test, it might be very common to report certain parts of that statistic, like the mean and median and certain facets of the population that was studied. But a preprint, you know, you have no guarantee necessarily that they've included all of the information. And the reason why a paper that is published in a journal would have this is because it's gone through this review process where people have kind of vouched for the quality of it, while also, you know, if there were any issues, they've given that feedback to the author, who has then added in those before publication. This isn't fully true, that all journals are better than preprint servers. With machine learning in particular, it's very common for machine learning researchers to put something on archive and not necessarily, you know, get it into a full journal. They might get it into conference proceedings, but with the speed that machine learning moves and the number of journals that are out there, which is not very big for machine learning, given the number of researchers, you know, you might find that there's actually a lot of relevant machine learning research that does have, you know, the information. But I would just flag, you know, be a little bit careful when you're getting it off a preprint server. And finally, there are some, they're called predatory journals, but there are some journals that essentially just charge a $3,000 or a $5,000 fee for publication. And so do watch out. And maybe if you come across a journal, you know, look for some of those journals that have really high brand recognition and high quality. There are often lists of predatory journals. So if you're relying on research for an important part of your own research, you know, maybe have a look out for lists of predatory journals, or have a look at even the application process to that journal and see if they're applying peer review, because peer review is generally the gold standard. All right, and there's also, my gosh, we're in the age of AI. There's also different AI search tools that you can use. For my master's thesis, I did try using Elicit. Like I really tried. Like I put in my search queries, and I was like, you know, most of these results are just either missing the point or the AI summary is not right. So this was a year ago attempting to use it, and it was not necessarily very good for my research that I was doing. What I did find was if I had gone through the university library and I'd already looked up and attempted to find something on a very specific topic, and it was kind of nice to use Elicit as a way to either verify that nobody had written on that very specific topic, or to use Elicit to kind of find very specific papers that had something around that. But Elicit, again, I would say, if you found something through Elicit, you do need to go and read that full paper. You do need to go and see if you can find that, because it is, you know, you're at risk of hallucinations. You're at risk of it just not coming up with something obvious that you've found, which, you know, this happened a few times. I was like, you've missed the point, and I've done the research and I know that you're just missing the point. And because it's a non-deterministic AI search tool, it's not a reproducible search. So you can't use this for a systematic search in any way. And of course, the summaries can have bias. I did find the summaries often wouldn't necessarily be accurate, even though this was a tool designed exactly for that. And Semantic Scholar is not providing so much of a structured explanation of the papers. I haven't actually used Semantic Scholar myself, but I'm aware that some people use it to find papers. Another thing that you can consider is Web of Science, where Web of Science allows you to look for the people who have cited or were cited by your paper. And so you can kind of move through time, and you can say, okay, here was where the original idea was posted, and then these people progressed it and changed it. And then, it developed into an extra section there. I might skip this one. I think most of us who have used Google in the last 20 years will kind of have some idea of different ways to apply your filters, but that is, often people will be using Boolean search strings, or there's like a combinatorial logic that they use for searches in these databases. Yeah, we'll do a little bit on this slide. So I just mentioned snowballing techniques, so going backward and forward through time and kind of watching that idea progress through different authors. Using Google search for author searching is another one that is quite useful to find other work by the key authors in your area. I assume that some of you will be working with grey literature, which is reports and theses and policy documents. So they're not necessarily journals. Sometimes they're not necessarily peer reviewed. You've got to take them with a bit of a grain of salt. Sometimes they're documents put out by companies, for example. These are all fine to find and use, but they're a different standard of transparency compared to general peer-reviewed research. And because this talk's recorded, you can come back and have a look at the others. But I'm mindful of time that I want to show you Zotero. So Zotero is the way that I manage my references. This is it's free open source software, and it has remained free and open source for a very long time, whereas some others, have eventually sold out. I don't know someone who doesn't speak really highly of Zotero. You can use shared libraries. So if you're working on a project with other people, you can collaborate with them. You can use the same resources. And if you add a resource, they'll have that that they can use. And it has a lot of integrations. So I use the Word and the Google Docs integrations often. It's also really easy to capture a web page that you're on. So I actually use this for job interviews, because when you apply for a job, sometimes they take the listing down, and I would just use my Zotero plugin to put it into a job interviews doc, and it would capture the page, and you'd have that page there, even if the page changes, which can be pretty useful if you're doing like something around transparency or the policies of a company, and you want to record that, and it will date stamp it and it will provide the link. And then it also has, it's very easy to export your references. So when I was doing my thesis, I just copied the references in LaTeX and pasted them into a LaTeX file. And then they all automatically synced, and any changes that I had made in Zotero automatically synced into the document that I was working on in my thesis. So I'm going to have a quick show of exactly how I would be using this. I've got, once you've downloaded Zotero, you can create little collections on the side. This is my little collection that I didn't do too much on for AI literacy.
I don't think we see your screen. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, sorry. Show my screen anyway, and then maybe change screen. I don't want, why am I over there? I will reshare that and present something else. Entire screen. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the interruption. Great, so Zotero, here's my here's my little list of references. There are different types. So this is a journal article, title explaining AI. Here are the authors and the publication. So this is all the data that, you know, when you input it into, say, a Word document or a LaTeX document, that it will automatically format this in the correct way for your publication or for your referencing style. And generally, it's best to make sure that you have either the DOI or the URL, because that's something that can help you track down and find that link. Usually people really love having DOIs in research, because it means that if you're reviewing that research, you can easily find and go and see what references they're relying on. So when so this is all stored locally on my computer in a folder that I can open up, and, you know, I can find the file at any time. So it's just got a Zotero storage file. And then if you want to read through it, you can open it up. It opens up the file and it records any highlighting that you do. For example, if I want to highlight this yellow, or if I want to make a note, you can change, you know, so this is really useful. I actually linked this up to Obsidian as well, in knowledge management software, so that I could export it. If anyone wants to know more about that, you can, and then you can write your own notes about what you remember or want to remember, and you can find those notes easily in the side panel. So I love Zotero. It's so good. I'm going to show you one more thing that might wow you about Zotero, which is if you go to archive, and let's say you have a, I'm trying to find out about AI governance in Australia. I find the perfect paper for myself. I go to look at this paper, and I go, yep, okay, that's the paper that I want. I take the URL. All it really needs is the archive identifying number. I go to Zotero, and I click this button here to add a new document. Oh no, to do the magic wand to add a new document. Paste in my URL, and it will get me, because it's archive and this hosts the PDFs online for free, it will actually get me the paper that I just found, and it will even have tucked in there the preprint PDF, so I can immediately start reading that. So I just find Zotero pretty fantastic. Proof that it works. Great, so there it is, and you can start editing. And finally, if you've installed Zotero on your computer, then you can install a Google Docs plugin, or you can, it should automatically add itself to your Microsoft Word. And when you're ready to add a citation, Australia does whatever, and add citation, and it will generally, oh, it's popped up in the other window. It'll ask you for your citation style, and then again, it's popped up in the other side. Let's get that over for you. And it actually has the document that I've most recently been working with in Zotero sitting here, ready to go. So I'm going to add that one in, and it processes the citation in my style, and then I'm going to add my bibliography. And then it will put all of the references in order in whatever the style that is required. And so, you know, a minute ago, this was a link on a website. Obviously, you're going to have to read through your content before you start citing it, but that is a pretty quick and fantastic process. So I'm at the end of my discussion on literature reviews. I can answer any questions, and I can also, I can just go and find the file, but I can show you a literature, or like a research summary that I had written for my own kind of literature summary and bibliography, so that you can figure out kind of a structure that might work for you. Do we have any questions? And I'll get that paper up in the background. Backyard science. What was Nayara, what was being described as backyard science there?
Oh, it was when you were talking about the preprints where, the work isn't really complete or it doesn't follow the rigorous process as you would in the more reputable journals.
Yeah. That's a good term for it. I'm going to steal that. Cool. We've got, are there any textbook examples of Prisma in AI safety policy research? Oh, that's a good example. I know that the AI risk repository done by MIT, where they created 2 different taxonomies of risks. I worked with the domain taxonomy of AI risk. This was not done by Prisma or systematic search. They did a process very, very similar, but they did not follow the very strict content. I think because they were using a lot of preprints. I'm not sure on their exact reasoning, but they kind of took 56 different risk taxonomies, and then they looked through it and found the common elements, and then they created one synthesized risk taxonomy. And there's one more that I'm thinking of that I think Risto Ook was involved in writing at the start of 2025, but maybe if I find that one, I'll pass that on to your team and they can put it in the appropriate place. Cool. Hillary.
Yeah, I thank you for this. This is really useful. I have 2 questions. One is, when you're doing literature review, I assume it's like you read the abstract and then do you jump to different sections? I assume you don't read all the papers all the way through. And sometimes I find myself, I'm reading a paper and then I'm like halfway through and I'm like, okay, this is not useful anymore, but I'm not sure,
how do you make sure that you don't waste time on stuff like that?
Yeah, that you're not diving in completely. And then the other piece of that too, maybe the similar but not, is this, I guess it's the replication crisis, but also just that some studies aren't done as well. So it's like, do we really need to, like the ones we're referencing, do I really need to dive in, whether it's peer reviewed or not, on their conclusions and how they did it? And sometimes I'm trying to access the GitHub repo to actually see the code as well, but I'm like, how deep do you go basically?
Yeah, so a lot of my research was in the social sciences. So I wasn't like looking to see if it was exactly laid out in I guess I didn't dive too much into the technical data, because usually in the social sciences they don't publish the data like they do in machine learning. What I did instead do was, when I came across a new paper, I would read the title, read the abstract, or skim the abstract. Does it seem relevant? And then I would actually skip to the conclusion. I would go straight from abstract to conclusion, and I would go, okay, is it now still relevant? And then once I went, okay, this is relevant to my research, I now want to figure out what they said. There'd be 2 checks to do. One is kind of what actually happened in the paper, and that's where you do your reading of, what did they do? What were they trying to find out? What did they find out? Were there any relationships that were interesting? But the second is were they robust? Do I believe them? So what did they say, and do I believe them? And for me, do I believe them was looking at the method and going, okay, what statistical test did they use in this, or what process? Sometimes reflexive thematic analysis. And there's usually for reflexive thematic analysis, there's a website of the researchers who have done it and kind of created a subfield of it. And they had a checklist for reviewers of if you're reviewing a paper, what should you be looking for in a reflexive thematic analysis? And so you can actually, if you see a particular statistical test, or in your case, if you see a particular method coming up often, you can sometimes go and just do a little bit of meta research and find out, okay, what should I be looking for to verify that they've done this correctly? And then you can go, okay, have they done, do I think that they've done this correctly? Okay, great. Now I can skim. And then I'd go title, abstract, conclusion, and then I would look at the method generally, and then I'd just fill in the other parts as relevant, like method, results. You're kind of going back between method and results. they might use some terms or reference some things, and so you have to go up to the introduction to get that review on the summary. And also, while I was doing my own kind of scoping out of the field, I would spend a lot of time in those introduction sections, because I would go, okay, what are the key ideas that they're coming across, you know, and who are the people who they're citing, and so then you can kind of flesh out, okay, this is the group of people that are talking about it. This is what people tend to say about this particular topic, because those literature reviews do kind of have a summary of the topic in them. And you know, if you skim the literature review and you're like, that's not true, then you're kind of like, okay, well, I'm not sure if I really trust this paper too much. Like, I've seen studies that make me dubious of this paper's positioning. You know, maybe the authors, which happens even if it's not a preprint, if it's a real academic paper, maybe the authors really just have their own bias that they're trying to push, and you're like, okay, all right, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical of you. Yeah. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, just one final question from me. Have you experimented using plugins from, say, search related LLMs like Exa or like Parallel? How has your experience been with those?
Yeah, I haven't used either of those, but I have used Elicit, which, as I said, it was ELICIT, which my experience of that was not very good, because an LLM, you know, an LLM is not going and judging the credibility of a study and then going, okay, this study is very credible. Well, LLMs, while I was doing my research, weren't at that level. And so my assumption is that these LLMs, I'm not sure exactly how the ones that you've mentioned work, but I would still be very skeptical. And in fact, I would tend to do my own research first and then create my own summary, and then use an LLM kind of to check that I've got everything. And if the LLM brings up something interesting, I go, oh, okay, maybe I'll do a quick search on that to see, because that does seem relevant to what I've done. But like, I also think my approach to my university studies was that I'm attempting to, you know, learn a lot of these processes by myself so that I can call bullshit on, you know, stuff that is done through large language models and done with biased or researchers who are too invested in an idea. So yeah. Just before I hand over, I know I said it would only take 20 minutes plus questions, and I took 30 minutes plus questions. But I'll just bring up my literature bibliography document. So I have, it's like, I don't know, 50 pages at the moment, but I had, you know, when I was creating when I was trying to figure out, like, what exactly do I want to do my research on? What do people say about this? I created one document that had been linked into Zotero. I kind of had, here are the papers that I still need to read. These are the little topics. And then, okay, I'm looking for taxonomies of benefits from AI. Here are the people. And so each kind of heading 2 was a topic, and then each heading 3 was a paper. And then I would just summarize or add my notes under here. And a good one was what's effective science? Which one did I do a really good summary at the top? Yeah, this one. Okay, so how technical should emerging technology coverage be? This summary is something that I kept on adding to as I was reading different papers, but I went through each paper and kind of noted down, okay, the thing that I'm taking from this paper is that this person says too much complexity can increase the reader's anxiety. And then the next paper, and this bit here is a Zotero citation that I inserted, and then I, you know, pasted the title of the document so it was easy to find in my outline. But Shakra, I actually used him a lot. This was a really good paper, right? This report summarizes blah, blah, blah. They chose to do this. Sometimes I would say I'm a bit dubious of their method. And like Yarnell and Rani, they did this. This is something that I want to make sure I see again, and a few other notes, so that it's really quick when kind of half a year later, or even like when 2 years later, I go, gosh, there was that paper where they did the thing and they trialed a journalist curriculum, and I can like search curriculum and I can go, ah, great, yeah, that was these guys. But what I'm also doing at that time as I'm reading is I'm going back and I'm creating essentially something that I can drop into my final paper, my literature review paper, literature review of my paper, because you know, you're writing down all of the people who have said things, various people preferred this, citation, and then, this suggests that we can lead into whatever. So kind of I would really advocate, because writing sucks sometimes, but like I would really advocate for writing as you go, and doing this kind of writing to understand, where you have a question and then you try to make your best answer of that question. So I'm going to stop talking now, because it's surely my 20 minutes.